Last time we spoke about the Jinzhou operation and the defense of Harbin. After the Mukden incident, Zhang Shuliang, despite commanding a very large army, was pressured into non-resistance against Japan. As tensions escalated, the Japanese bombed Jinzhou to intimidate Zhang Shuliang and the Kwangtung army, prepared to invade. By January 1st of 1932, Zhang Shuliang's forces retreated, marking a significant loss for China. Meanwhile, Ma Jiashan emerged as a resistance hero, navigating complex alliances against Japanese aggression. In the face of said Japanese aggression, Ding Zhao rallied forces in Harbin, a crucial city in the northeastern parts of China. Together with Ma Jiashan and other generals, they formed the Jinin Self-Defense Army to resist the Japanese advance. Despite the fierce battles, including victories at Shaoke and Churan, the Japanese ultimately launched a full-scale assault. After a lot of intense fighting, Harbin fell on February 5th. The resistance crumbled, leading to Ma Jiashan's defection and the establishment of the puppet state of Manchuria. This episode is the January 28th incident. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia, and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. Me and my co-host Garev have recently decided to move Echoes of War onto the YouTube channel, that being the Pacific War channel, so the weekly episodes can also be found there. And this will include a lot of visuals. We're going to incorporate maps, photos, clips, and such to just give it, more of a personal touch. If you'd like to further support me, please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. And I will state it here because I'm almost done writing it, and it's taken me quite a while. My patrons and YouTube members voted, and they said they would like from me an alternate history series based off of the Pacific War. So, the first episode is going to be titled The Great Naval Battle of Pearl Harbor. So that's just a bit of a teaser, please go check it out. In the words of the late and great Ron Burgundy, boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast. Yishuada Kanji unleashed the Mukden incident, beginning a series of military conflicts. The Kwangtung army invaded all three provinces of Manchuria. Ma Jiashan tried to fight back at Heilongjiang province, Ding Zhao at Harbin, and Zhang Shuliang kind of at Jinzhou. He really just ran away, though. All of this culminated in the conquest of Manchuria and the establishment of a new puppet state of Manchuria. However, simultaneously, another significant conflict broke out in Shanghai. Now, before we start this one, I want to point out that there are a lot of bias issues with how this incident began. It is known as the January 28th incident, or the First Battle of Shanghai. There are a few arguments as to how it exactly began, but the two main narratives are as such. During the invasion of Manchuria, anti-Japanese demonstrations broke out across China, particularly in large cities like Shanghai and Guangzhou. In most Japanese sources, these demonstrations got out of hand, requiring military action to defend Japanese citizens and property in Shanghai. Now, as for Chinese sources, and I will say it here, I place a lot more credibility on the Chinese side on this one. During the invasion of Manchuria, the League of Nations passed resolutions to get the Japanese to withdraw their troops, and many of the members expressed support for China. Although the United States was not a member of the League, Secretary of State Stimson issued a non-recognition note in response to Japan's occupation of Jinzhou, aiming to pressure Japan. This isolation in the international arena heightened anxiety within the Japanese government and its military, prompting them to seek conflicts in other regions of China to divert attention away from the invasion of Manchuria. That is the argument Chinese sources make. I think it's a bit of both and it's a little bit more organic, but you get the picture. Also, before we start this one, if you're interested, I actually have a video covering this event, so if you want to see more visuals and, a little bit more action and such, well, go over to my YouTube channel, you can check it out. Now, a lot of trouble had been stirred up in Shanghai ever since the Mukden incident broken out. Shanghai's business community initiated a boycott of Japanese trade, significantly impacting Japanese coastal and the Yangtze River shipping industries. To give one example, the Nissan Steamship Company halted all operations since the incident. Between July of 1931 and the end of March of 1932, Japanese merchants in Shanghai reportedly suffered losses amounting to 41 billion yen. To give you an idea, in 1930, Japanese goods accounted for 29% of Shanghai's average monthly imports, but by December of 1931, this figure had plummeted to just 3%. On October the 5th of 1931, the Japanese government convened a cabinet meeting, resolving that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would issue a stern warning to the national government, with the Foreign Ministry and Naval Ministry overseeing the issue of ship deployment. Shanghai was the key hub for Western powers in China. It was here they made significant investments and maintained strong commercial interests in the region. The political and economic dynamics amongst these powers was quite intricate. Shanghai held the largest amount of foreign settlements and concessions. Any outbreak of war in Shanghai would inevitably capture the international attention and prompt intervention from nations with vested interests, such as Britain, the United States, or France. On October the 1st, Tanaka Takeyoshi, the assistant military attaché at the Japanese consulate in Shanghai and the head of the Shanghai Secret Service, was summoned to Shenyang by Colonel Itagaki Seshiro, who would tell him, "Our next move is to occupy Harbin and make Manchuria independent. We have sent Colonel Dohara to pick up Puyi. If we succeed, the League of Nations will have a big fight, and the Tokyo government will have a large headache. I want you to do something in Shanghai to divert the attention of other countries. When you cause a commotion, we will take Manchuria." To this, Tanaka promised to complete the task and said that he was, quote, "training an excellent spy who can bribe Chinese troublemakers in Shanghai to start a fake war." Itagaki then withdrew 20,000 yen from the Kwangtung Army's Secret Service funds and provided it to Tanaka for operational purposes. Now here it's about to get pretty wild. Tanaka took the funds and he paid a Japanese female spy named Kawashima Yoshiko, known also as Jin Buhuai, but whose birth name was actually Aisingero Xianyu, with the courtesy name of Dongzhen, meaning Eastern Jewel. Yes, that is the name of a Manchu royal. To be more precise, the 14th daughter of Xianqi, a Manchu prince of the Aisangoro clan of the former Qing dynasty. Xianqi was a descendant of Hongzhu, the eldest son of Hong Taiji. It all comes back full circle sometimes. After the Shanghai Revolution, Xianyu was given up for adoption in 1915 to her father's friend, Naniwa Kawashima, a Japanese spy and adventurer. Henceforth, she took the name Yoshiko Kawashima. She was raised in Tokyo and excelled at judo and fencing. In 1922, her biological father, Shanqi, died, and as Manchu royal tradition dictated, her biological mother committed suicide to join her husband in death. On November the 22nd of 1925, Yoshiko stated that she, quote, "decided to stop being a woman forever." Henceforth, she stopped wearing a kimono, undid her traditional female hairstyle, and took a final photo to commemorate. It was titled, "My Farewell to Life as a Woman." You can Google this photo. That same evening, she went to a barbershop and she got a crew cut, and from there she went to a men's clothing store. A photo of this dramatic transformation appeared 5 days later in the Asahi Shimbun, with the title, "Kawashima Yoshiko's beautiful black hair completely cut off because of unfounded rumors. Makes firm decision to become a man. Touching secret tale of her shooting herself." Yes, there is a lot to unpack in that title. The title was referencing a prior scandal where she allegedly shot herself in the chest with a pistol given to her by one Iwata Anisuke. Historians believe it is much more likely she chose to become a man because of the death of her parents, failed romances, or possibly sexual abuse from her foster father. Kawashima would go on to explain to a news reporter 2 days later, "I was born with what the doctors called a tendency towards the third sex. and so I cannot pursue an ordinary woman's goals in life. Since I was young, I've been dying to do things that boys do. My impossible dream is to work hard like a man for China, for Asia." She was in fact something of a tomboy in her youth, despite being quite beautiful. Now, obviously, the times being the times, those close to her were, let's just say, not very receptive to this dramatic change. Thus, in November of 1927, at the age of 20, her brother and adoptive father arranged her to be married in Port Arthur to one Ganjurajab, the son of an Inner Mongolian army general, Babojab, who had led the Mongolian Manchurian independence movement in 1911. The marriage lasted only 3 years, ending in a divorce. Following this, she left Mongolia and began touring coastal cities of China before adopting a bohemian lifestyle back in Tokyo, where she had relationships with both men and women. She then moved to Shanghai's foreign concession, where she met the Japanese military attaché and intelligence officer, Ryukichi Tanaka. And this takes us back to our story at hand. On the afternoon of January 18th, 1932, Yoshiko Kawashima orchestrated an incident by enlisting 2 Japanese Nichiren monks and 3 other Japanese supporters to stir up trouble at the Sanyo Industrial Company headquarters on Mayushan Road. This is located near the East District of the Shanghai International Settlement. The group of 5 Japanese individuals watched the worker volunteer army training outside the factory and threw stones to provoke a confrontation, intentionally sparking a conflict. Prior to this, Yoshiko Kawashima had also hired some thugs disguised as workers to blend in with the crowd. During the altercation, the 5 Japanese individuals were attacked by the unknown assailants. The Japanese consul general later reported that one of the Japanese individuals had died and another was seriously injured. However, the police were unable to apprehend the culprits, prompting Japan to accuse the Chinese factory patrol team of being behind the entire attack. This event became known as the Japanese Monk Incident. At 2:40 a.m. on January the 20th, following orders from Yoshiko, the military police captain, Chihara Shigeto, led 32 members of the Shanghai Japanese Youth Comrades Association in China to sneak into the Sanyo Industrial Company factory. They brought guns, bayonets, and other weapons, along with flammable materials such as saltpeter and kerosene. Dozens of members of the Japanese Youth Association set fire to the Sanyo Industrial Society that very night. And then they hacked to death and injured 2 Chinese policemen from the municipal council who came to organize some firefighting. That afternoon, Tanaka Takeyoshi instigated 1,200 Japanese expatriates to gather at the Japanese Residents Association on Wanchangshu Road, and they marched along Beichuan Road to the Japanese Marine Corps headquarters at the northern end of the road, demanding that the Japanese Marine Corps intervene. When they reached Chujiang Road, they started rioting and they attacked Chinese shops. In response, Shanghai Mayor Wu Tuqiang formally protested to Japan. Japan in return demanded a formal apology from the mayor and the apprehension of the person responsible for the death of the Japanese monk. Japan also insisted that China pay compensation for medical and funeral expenses, handle the anti-Japanese protests, and immediately disband any groups hostile to Japan. China would firmly reject these unreasonable demands. On the morning of January the 21st, Japanese Consul General Murai Kurematsu met with the Shanghai Mayor, Wu Tuqiang, to express regret for the Japanese arson and the killing of a Chinese police officer. He promised to arrest the Japanese Ronin responsible for the fire. At the same time, he presented a formal protest regarding the Japanese monk incident, and he outlined 4 demands. Demand number 1, the mayor must issue an apology to the consul general. Number 2, the authorities should swiftly and effectively search for, arrest, and punish the perpetrators. Number 3, the 5 victims should receive medical compensation and consolation money. And number 4, all illegal actions against Japan should be prohibited, with the Shanghai Anti-Japanese National Salvation Association and other anti-Japanese groups disbanded promptly. Now, starting on January the 22nd, Admiral Shiozawa of the Japanese Navy and the Consul General, Murai, demanded that the Shanghai Mayor Wu dissolve anti-Japanese groups and halt any boycott activities. Representatives of Japanese business conglomerates, Zaibatsu, also filed complaints with the Shanghai International Settlement's Municipal Council, calling for an official apology from China for the offensive report and the attacks upon the monks, and demanding that the attackers be punished. As tensions rose, the Japanese Residents Association urged Japanese naval forces in Shanghai to take measures to protect their safety. That same day, Yukichi Shoizawa, the commander of the 1st Japanese Expeditionary Fleet in Shanghai, made a threatening declaration, stating that if the mayor of Shanghai failed to respond adequately to the 4 demands presented by Matsue, the Japanese Navy would, quote, take appropriate action. Even before this, the Japanese Navy had deployed troops and sent additional warships to Shanghai under the pretext of protecting its citizens. In addition to the warships that arrived in Shanghai after the Mukden incident, the Japanese Navy sent the cruiser Oi, and on the 15th, the destroyer squadron, comprising 4 destroyers from the mainland Wu port. They carried over about 450 personnel from the 1st Special Marine Corps, along with a large supply of arms that all arrived to Shanghai on January the 23rd. The following day, the Notoro Special Service Ship, which is an aircraft carrier of 14,000 tons carrying 6 aircraft, anchored off in Port Arthur, also arrived to Shanghai. Back on January the 22nd, the Japanese government convened a meeting and decided to take appropriate measures, with Navy Minister Osumi Tsunyo handling the situation as deemed necessary. By the 25th, the heads of the Japanese Navy Ministry and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs held a joint session where they agreed that if the Chinese side failed to demonstrate sincerity or meet the Japanese demands, force would be used to ensure compliance. They also agreed on specific emergency actions. On the 26th, the Navy Ministry met again and resolved to demonstrate Japan's military strength within the next day or 2. The proposed measures were as follows. Number 1, if the Shanghai garrison was insufficient, the 2nd Fleet would be deployed. Number 2, Japanese citizens in Shanghai would be directly protected. Number 3, the Japanese Navy would secure the route from Wusong to Shanghai. Number 4, all Chinese vessels would be detained outside Wusongkao. Number 5, additional warships would be sent to ports in Nanjing, Hankou, Guangzhou, Santou, Xiamen, and other locations, with civil unrest in those areas being addressed. Emperor Hirohito authorized the Japanese Navy's military actions. On the 26th, Hirohito's military meeting, led by Chief of Staff Prince Kainin, ordered Yukichi Shiozawa in Shanghai to exercise the right of self-defense. That same day, the Japanese Navy Ministry urgently deployed the 1st Torpedo Squadron with the flagship Yubari, which is a cruiser, accompanied by the 22nd, 23rd, and 30th Destroyer Squadrons, totaling 12 destroyers, with about 460 personnel from the 2nd Special Marine Corps, who all arrived to Shanghai in the afternoon of January the 28th. By this time, the Japanese military had gathered about 24 warships, over 40 aircraft, and more than 1,830 Marines, and between 3,000 to 4,000 armed personnel in Shanghai, stationed across the Japanese concession and along the Huangpu River. On the 28th, the Japanese Naval Ministry instructed the deployment of the aircraft carriers Kaga and Hosho, the cruisers Naka, Yura, Abukuma, and 4 mine carriers from the mainland to Shanghai. Now back on the 24th, Japanese intelligence agents set fire to the residence of the Japanese ambassador to China, Shigemitsu Mamoru, falsely accusing the Chinese of the act. On the 27th, Murray issued an ultimatum to the Shanghai authorities demanding a satisfactory response to the 4 conditions by about 6 p.m. on the 28th, threatening necessary actions if the deadline was not met. Meanwhile, with threats and rumors of Japanese naval landings circulating in Shanghai, the nearby 19th Route Army units moved closer to the international settlement's Little Tokyo. The 19th Route Army of the Guangdong Army was in charge of defending Shanghai at this time, with Jiang Guangnai serving as the commander-in-chief and Cai Jingkai as the commander. Chen Mingxue, the leader of the 19th Route Army and the commander of the Beijing Shanghai garrison, was a strong proponent of responding to the Japanese Army's provocations. The Chinese public, along with critics of the Nanjing government, called for punishment of the Manchurian warlord forces who had failed to halt the Guangdong Army's blitzkrieg, which encouraged officers of the 19th Route Army to take a firm stance. As the Nanjing government had not enacted any policies, General Cai Jingkai and his colleagues convened an emergency meeting on the 23rd, pledging to resist any potential Japanese naval invasion of Shanghai at all costs. Now the Nanjing government response to this crisis was quite chaotic, as you can imagine. There was still an anti-communist campaign going on, Manchuria was being taken over, and Chiang Kai-shek fully understood that they could ill afford an all-out war with Japan. There was a general feeling things were getting out of hand. The League of Nations were failing to do anything. Thus Chiang Kai-shek retained his passive stance. On January the 23rd, after extensive consultations with Wang Jingwei and Chiang Kai-shek, the newly appointed executive yuan president, Sun Ke, urgently telegraphed the Shanghai mayor, "Our priority should be the preservation of Shanghai as the economic center, adopting a moderate stance towards Japan's demands. We must immediately gather all sectors to diplomatically explain our position and avoid conflict to prevent Shanghai from being seized by force." That same day, the Minister of Military Affairs Hu Yingqian also sent a telegram to Wu Qiqiang, emphasizing, "Shanghai is our economic hub, and we must complete peaceful negotiations and avoid conflict." On that same day, Hu Yingqian instructed the 19th Route Army to withdraw from Shanghai and relocate west of Nanjiang within 5 days. Jiang Jingjiang then invited Tai Jingkai to Du Yusheng's home, where he convinced the 19th Route Army to, quote, "withdraw to the Nanjiang area to avoid confrontation with the Japanese." Upon learning of the nationalist government's position, both Chiang Kai-shek and Tai Ying-ying were disappointed, but they expressed willingness to follow military orders and withdraw from Shanghai. As Tian Guangnai put it, "We must simply obey the government's orders." On the afternoon of January the 27th, the Chief of Staff, Zhu Peide, and the Ministry of Military Affairs, Hu Yingqian, deployed the 6th Military Police Regiment to assume responsibility for defending the 19th Route Army's positions in the Jiabei area of Shanghai. The regiment departed Nanjing Station at 8 p.m. on the 27th, reaching Jianru by the noon of 28th. The 1st Battalion arrived at Shanghai North Station that very afternoon, preparing to take over the defenses from the 6th Regiment of the 156th Brigade of the 78th Division of the 19th Route Army in Jiabei, and this was at dawn on January the 29th. Now, back on the 27th, after Murai issued an ultimatum to the Chinese authorities in Shanghai, the mayor, Wu Tuqiang, responded to a request from both the Nanjing national government and various sectors of Shanghai by sending a letter out on the 28th at about 1:45 p.m. accepting all the unreasonable demands made by the Japanese. Later at 11 p.m., the Shanghai Public Security Bureau received a response from Murai, which was directed to both the mayor and the head of the Shanghai Public Security Bureau. In the letter, Murai expressed satisfaction with Shanghai's acceptance of Japan's 4 demands, but also insisted on the withdrawal of Chinese troops from Jiabei, citing the need to protect overseas Chinese. Wu Taichung received this response at about 11:25 p.m. Then at 11:30, without waiting for a reply from the Chinese side, the Japanese military launched an attack on the Chinese garrison in Jiabei. In response, Wang Zhaoyuan's troops from the 156th Brigade of the 78th Division, along with elements of the 6th Regiment of the Military Police, began to fight back. Now, following the September 18th incident, Chiang Kai-shek entered into negotiations with the Guangdong faction. As part of these discussions between Nanjing and Guangdong, the Guangdong side proposed that Chen Mingshi, a Cantonese leader, be appointed as the commander-in-chief of the Beijing-Shanghai garrison. On September the 30th of 1931, Chiang Kai-shek agreed to this proposal. Consequently, the 19th Route Army under Chen Mingshi's command was transferred from Guangzhou, Jiangxi, where it had been stationed after the incident, also following Chiang Kai-shek's decision to halt the suppressing of the Communist campaign, to defend the Beijing-Shanghai area. By November, the army was fully deployed along the Beijing-Shanghai line. The military leadership included Zhang Guangnai as commander-in-chief, Tai Jingkai as the army commander, and Dai Ji as the garrison commander. The army was composed of the 60th Division, led by Shen Guanghan, stationed in Suzhou and Changzhou, the 61st Division, led by Ma Wuzhou, stationed in Nanjing and Zhenjiang, and the 78th Division, led by Chu Shonyan, stationed in Shanghai, Wusang, Kunshan, and Jiaoding. Their total strength was about 33,000 soldiers. By early November, after the 19th Route Army had secured the Beijing and Shanghai areas, the military leadership, influenced by Shanghai's populace, who were very anti-Japanese, resolved to resist the impending Japanese invasion. On January the 15th, the 19th Route Army assessed intelligence indicating an inevitable Japanese attack and began preparing for a defense, less than 2 weeks before the invasion. On the 19th, Zhang Gangnai convened a meeting of the 19th Route Army officers in Shanghai. During said meeting, several strategic policies were decided, as recalled by Tai Jingkai. These would include maintaining an invisible state of alert in response to the potential enemy harassment, ensuring that frontline units were adequately reinforced, with Chu Shanyan's division tasked with holding out for at least 5 days, rapidly constructing fortifications in each defensive zone, while rear units pre-selected lines of resistance, ensuring that the 60th and 61st Divisions could reinforce Shanghai within 5 days of the start of hostilities. They would establish a stance on the Shanghai concession. Orders were issued out starting on January the 20th. No officers or soldiers were to remain in the concession unless on official duty. On the 23rd, under mounting pressure from Japan, Chen Mingshi, Zhang Gangnai, Tai Qingkai, and the others issued a letter to all officers and soldiers of the 19th Route Army, urging a great spirit of sacrifice. On that same day, the army issued a secret combat order stating that they must be fully prepared for a war to defend the entire nation. If the Japanese attacked, all efforts should be focused on repelling them. The 19th Route Army was poised to resist the Japanese invasion in the Songhu area. On the 24th, Tai Qingkai and his colleagues arrived in Suzhou, and they held an emergency meeting with the senior garrison commanders, including Shen Guanghan, to communicate the secret order issued on the 23rd. The generals unanimously supported the directive. However, under pressure from the national government to avoid war, Chiang, Tai, and the others reluctantly agreed to comply with the order to withdraw from Shanghai. As we've seen, they ordered the Jiabai garrison to exchange duties with the 6th Military Police Regiment on the 29th. Now, due to the tense situation, the commander of the 156th Brigade of the 78th Division instructed the 6th Regiment at Jiabai to remain on high alert. At 11 p.m. on January the 28th, Daijie had also ordered strict vigilance to prevent the Japanese army from occupying Jiabai during the guard change, instructing all units to take their positions and to be on high alert. At 11:30 p.m. on January the 28th, Major General Shiwazawa and the Japanese Marine Corps unexpectedly attacked the Chinese garrison, located at the west side of the North Sichuan Road. This brings us right back to where we were. In response, the 6th Regiment of the 156th Brigade, commanded by Zhang Chonsong, promptly initiated a strong counteroffensive. At that moment, the Japanese forces, spearheaded by over 20 armored vehicles, split into 5 groups and launched assaults from different intersections in Jiabai. Upon receiving news of the Japanese attack, Zhang Guangnai, Tai Qingkai, and Daijie hurried to General Station on foot during the night, establishing a temporary command center. He instructed the rear troops to advance swiftly to Shanghai as per the original plan. At dawn on the 29th, the Japanese forces launched a series of intense assaults supported by armored vehicles. Aircraft from the carrier Notoro bombed the Jiabai and Nanshu districts, leading to a rapid escalation of the conflict. The 156th Brigade of the defending forces fiercely resisted the Japanese advances, using cluster grenades against the enemy's armored units and organizing stealth squads to sabotage enemy vehicles. They held their positions and they counterattacked at opportune moments under artillery cover, successfully repelling the relentless Japanese assaults. According to Japanese accounts, the battle was described as, quote, extremely fierce, with fires raging everywhere, flames filling the sky, and the battlefield in a state of devastation. At around 10 a.m., Japanese aircraft dropped bombs, causing the commercial press and the Oriental Library to catch fire, resulting in the destruction of over 300,000 books, including many rare ancient texts. More than 1,000 Japanese soldiers, shielded by heavy artillery and armored vehicles, launched a vigorous attack at the intersection of the Baoshan Road and the Kuijiang Road, aiming to seize the Shanghai North Railway Station. This station was a crucial land transport hub, and its control was vital for the safety of the entire Jiabai area. At 2 p.m. on the 29th, taking advantage of the chaos at the North Station, the Japanese forces mounted a fierce assault. A company from the military police engaged in combat with the Japanese for over an hour before withdrawing from the station. By 5 p.m. on the 29th, the main force of the 156th Brigade entered the fray and launched a counteroffensive, reclaiming both the North Station and the Tongtong'an Station. They pressed their advantage and they captured the Japanese Shanghai Marine Corps headquarters, forcing the Japanese troops to retreat east of the North Sichuan Road and south of Target Road. Thus, the initial Japanese offensive ended in defeat. Following the setback, British and American consuls intervened to mediate in the afternoon of the 29th. The Shanghai government stated that it was at the request of the Japanese consuls, while the League of Nations report indicated it was actually initiated by the mayor of Shanghai. The Chinese and Japanese forces agreed to cease hostilities at 8 p.m. that night. Although the 19th Route Army recognized this to be a delaying tactic, they consented to the ceasefire to allow for troops' redeployment. Concurrently, the 19th Route Army strengthened their positions, urgently ordering the 60th Division from the east of Zhenjiang to move into Nanxiang and Chenru, while transferring the 61st Division to Shanghai. The 78th Division stationed in Shanghai was fully mobilized to the front lines to bolster defenses and prepare for further combat. Following the ceasefire, the Japanese army made significant efforts to bolster its forces. The Japanese Navy Ministry promptly dispatched 4 destroyers from the Sasebo 26 Squadron under the command of the cruiser Tetsuta to reach Shanghai on January the 30th and dock at the Huangpu Wharf. Accompanying the vessel were 474 soldiers from the Sasebo 3rd Special Marine Corps, alongside substantial supplies of ammunition. On the morning of January the 31st, the Japanese aircraft carriers Kaga and Hosho reached Shanghai, bringing approximately 30 aircraft from the 1st Air Fleet. They anchored off the coast at Ma'an Islands, about 130 kilometers east of Shanghai. By 4 p.m., 3 cruisers, the Naka, Yura, and Abikuma, along with 4 torpedo boats, also arrived to Shanghai, transporting over 2,000 Marines who disembarked in groups. On February the 1st, the Japanese cruiser ship Torokoku Maru, carrying the Yokosuka 1st Special Marine Corps of 525 men, docked at Shanghai's Hushan Wharf. On the 2nd, the Japanese Navy Central Headquarters established the 3rd Fleet with ships from the 1st Overseas Fleet in the Yangtze River area, with the Izumo serving as the flagship. This was all under the command of Vice Admiral Yoshiburo Nomamura to execute a coordinated military operation. Following the reinforcement of Japanese forces, they resumed their attacks on the Chinese defenders in Jai Bay, Baizichao, and other locations on the 3rd, but they were repelled. On the 4th, the Japanese launched their first major offensive, expanding the conflict to Jingwan and Wusang. After a day of intense fighting, the Wusang open-air artillery fort suffered destruction from enemy bombardment, yet the Chinese defenders successfully prevented a Japanese landing there. The anti-aircraft artillery unit from the 88th Division, assigned to the 4th Regiment of the 156th Brigade, shot down a Japanese aircraft. Following the failure of the general offensive, Shiozawa was relieved of command and he was sent back to Japan. Nomura, the newly appointed commander of the 3rd Fleet, took over for Shiozawa's position. Upon his appointment, the Japanese military began to bolster its forces even more. Even before the situation in Shanghai escalated, Japan had planned to deploy ground troops, but this was initially rejected by the Navy. However, as the situation deteriorated, the Navy had to request assistance from the Army. Back on February the 2nd, the Japanese cabinet officially decided to deploy ground forces. Due to the urgent circumstances in Shanghai, they resolved to send the Shanghai Dispatch Mixed Brigade, led by Major General Shimamoto Kuma, and the 9th Division, led by Lieutenant General Yuda Kenkichi, with the Shanghai Dispatch Mixed Brigade and the 2nd Independent Tank Squadron being transported first. The 24th Mixed Brigade landed at Wusong in the afternoon of the 7th. Now, within the backdrop of all of this, Nanjing was certainly freaking out. What had started as a small incident had escalated into a full-blown battle. The Japanese were continuously sending reinforcements, and now, so was China. Chiang Kai-shek had recently resigned, and he had just come back as the Generalissimo, ushering in a new slogan: "First internal pacification, then external resistance." And with that, he had led a massive campaign against the Jiangxi Soviet while avoiding a frontal war with Japan. Obviously, this led to wide-scale protest in China, which in turn contributed to the new incident in Shanghai. The Shanghai incident was certainly disrupting Chiang Kai-shek's offensives against the communists, allowing those like Hu Hanmin's Guangdong-based 19th Route Army to deal with the Japanese at Shanghai as they pleased. Yet how long could Chiang Kai-shek keep this up? Should he divert all attention to the Japanese? Will he step down again in shame for not facing the encroaching foreign empire? I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I'm about to release a very long documentary covering the Boxer Rebellion and the Russo-Japanese War. This one will be titled The Battle for the Asia Pacific. And over on Echoes of War, we're about to begin a new series covering the campaign in Malaya during World War II. If you'd like to further support me, please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/pacificwarchannel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. The January 28th incident was yet another powder keg moment for a very vulnerable and still fractured Chinese nation. Chiang Kai-shek had internal enemies left, right, and center, and now the Empire of Japan was pressing its luck to keep seizing more and more from his nation. What was the Generalissimo to do in the face of these insurmountable odds?